This episode is supported by FX's Clipped, the scandalous story of the 2014 Clippers owner's racist remarks captured on tape and heard around the world. The series charts the tape's impact on a dysfunctional basketball organization striving to win against their reputation as the most cursed team in the league. Starring Lawrence Fishburne, Jackie Weaver, Cleopatra Coleman, and Ed O'Neill. FX's Clipped, streaming June 4th, only on Hulu.
This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Whether you're selling a little or a lot, Shopify helps you do your thing, however you cha-ching. From the launch your online shop stage, all the way to the we just hit 1 million orders stage. No matter what stage you're in, Shopify's there to help you grow. Sign up for a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/special offer, all lowercase. That's shopify.com/special offer.
I'm Stephen Metcalf, and this is the Slate Culture Gabfest Damn Dirty Apes edition. It's Wednesday, May 15th, 2024. On today's show, Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes. Hey, why not?
He loves.
Throw another one on the Barbie,
Yep.
right? Make some coin. Anyway, it's a fourth chapter in the Planet of the Apes reboot franchise, whatever you want to call it. It takes place generations after the great ape leader Caesar has died. Ape society's fractured into warring clans. We'll get into it, don't worry. It stars Owen Teague and Freya Allen. And then Netflix is dipping its toe in the live TV waters. There was a Tom Brady roast. And then there was also John Mulaney Presents Everybody's in L.A. It was a interview comedy chat show. What's it? It ran only 6 episodes. It was part lark, part trial balloon, I guess. We'll discuss. And finally, Nirvana, Pixies, PJ Harvey, The Breeders, the list goes on and on. Steve Albini, who died last week, produced some of the most enduring rock and roll records of the past generation. We will discuss his legacy with our good friend and Slate music critic, Carl Wilson. But first, joining me today is Julia Turner, a fellow at the Annenberg School of Journalism at USC. Julia, hey, how's it going?
Hello, Steve.
Hey, and of course, Dana Stevens is the film critic for Slate.com. Hello, Dana.
Hey, Stephen.
Shall we make a show?
Let's go on and do
Let's
it.
please do. Okay. 2011 to 2017, if I have the dates right, saw the release of 3 surprisingly good. I thought there was a lot of upside surprise with those movies. That original trio of Planet of the Apes reboot movies. They starred the actor Andy Serkis, as aided by pretty sophisticated motion capture techniques to make him look like an ape. But he was Caesar, an ape endowed by science with higher cognitive functioning and who leads an ape rebellion against us, the decadent humans. Now comes a 4th movie. It takes place long after the great Caesar has died. And the apes, being our evolutionary cousins, have fallen into tribalism, factionalism, and war. The main storyline here involves a young ape, Noah, on a quest to find his kidnapped family. In the clip we're about to hear, Noah, played by Owen Teague, discusses with his new friend, a wise orangutan, played by Peter Macon, their new and mysterious 3rd friend, and very Homo sapien companion played by Freya Allen. Let's have a listen.
What did I miss?
She spoke. She called my name.
You misheard.
You said this Nova was smarter than most.
Within reason. Some intelligence, to be sure.
I have a name. May. I know where they're taking your clan.
So, Dana, there's this, am I right to say, kind of a trend of a trilogy reboot, right? Followed by a reboot, a re-reboot, or a 4th installment. I mean, Jurassic Park being an example, and here we go again. I don't know. Is there's on the one hand, there's all that built-in goodwill from a pretty brilliantly executed trilogy. On the other hand, there's a why a tetralogy? Why? I mean, we know why, but what did you make of this as a movie?
I do put this in a somewhat different category than the Jurassic World revisiting. because it feels less like a cynical cash grab to me. And also that trilogy was so associated with Spielberg.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I think that this is a less auteur-driven kind of trilogy, so I guess I don't mind as much it being revisited. But, well, I mean, to see my review of this movie for my ambivalence on exactly that question, I have an enormous amount of goodwill toward this trilogy. And so I was interested to see it get revisited. But to me, if there's an auteur of the Planet of the Apes trilogy from the 2010s, it's Andy Serkis.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, what's really extraordinary about those movies, I think, is the creation of that character, both the digital technological creation of that character, because to me, at least, it was the most sophisticated use of motion capture I'd seen, but also just the performance and the kind of understanding of both that technology and that character by Andy Serkis, who, of course, more or less invented the motion capture acting technique, right? I mean, he was Gollum in Lord of the Rings, which is the first time most of us saw anything like that on the big screen. Then he was King Kong in Peter Jackson's King Kong. He's going to go on to, to keep on playing Gollum in these godforsaken Hobbit movies that Peter Jackson, for some reason, keeps wasting his talent on.
Speaking of cynical,
but I think Caesar is maybe his greatest creation. And I think that's because those movies were really about politics in a way that a lot of blockbusters aren't. They weren't just woodenly creating allegories that we were all supposed to assign to contemporary politics. They really were about power. And the center one in the series was even sort of about the corruption of power. Mm-hmm. It was kind of a Shakespearean allegory in which, this all-powerful ape who had essentially, because he was the most hyper-intelligent ape because of this mutation, had risen to a position of absolute power that he could have abused. And really the conflict of that middle movie is he going to abuse his power or not, right? So the complexity in those movies was within that main character. And to me, this movie is weaker because the conflict has been externalized and it is a more typical sort of good guys versus bad guys story. That said, I still think the Planet of the Apes movies are a lot more interesting and a lot more solid as just well-crafted summer blockbuster filmmaking than most of what's out there. And so I'm kind of ambivalent on this movie. It's nowhere near the category of the Andy Serkis movies, but it respects that tradition and it respects its characters. And it's pretty fun watching, but maybe a little disappointing in that it has no reason to exist. What do you think, Julia? Is it a cynical cash grab? Am I wrong?
I loved this movie, actually. I agree that it doesn't reach the heights of the prior trilogy and that it's hard to replace Andy Serkis. And I think this movie also suffered from part one syndrome, where it does a lot of work to establish the world and set up some complicated philosophical terrain to explore, but is really just one gigantic establishing shot in some way. I mean, it gives us kind of a quest movie. It has a Western feel. I mean, I just saw The Searchers here in LA. There was a presentation of it at a local rep theater. And it's not, it's like a couple of people out on the range looking for some people. There's a stretch of the film that has that rhythm. But I think fundamentally the philosophical and kind of political theory nature of these films, like they are curious about ideas. They're using all of this filmmaking technology to explore really interesting and fundamental ideas about civilization and how it evolves. And that's a super interesting thing to do with this IP, right? It's there for the taking. And, I think this movie does externalize the bad guy, and the bad guy is very bad. And the gruff, mean, vainglorious warlord apes do indeed seem uncomplicatedly easy to root against. But the relationship between the apes we come to know and the human character May has so much ambivalence embedded within it, whether they can trust each other, whether anybody can use technology for good, whether there could truly be an equal society. But, the seeds are planted for an interesting film that explores more complicated and ambiguous material in the future. And I don't know, I thought that the pacing, the storytelling, the choreography, the rhythm were very grounded and pretty great. And I also want to shout out Owen Teague. You know what Owen Teague's last role that I remember is? He was the son in the Nicole Holofcener movie, that we just talked about. With
nice
Dreyfuss.
catch. Yeah.
Very well
Obviously,
done.
as an ape, I wouldn't have recognized his face, but he actually has a similar quality in both characters, a sort of a doofy, vulnerable kid.
Yeah.
Well, and he was also the son into Leslie. So he's been kind of on the scene as the wounded, can he become a man's son? And I think he does a great job in this. I thought that he's not Andy Serkis, but I actually think the kind of arc of the evolution of this character coming into manhood, which involves eagles. So maybe that's why I like it, but it's great. It's great.
No, I completely agree that all the people as apes do a really, really good job. I think the human characters in this movie seem a little more wooden, and that female human character you hear in the clip is just kind of a plot device.
Yeah.
Oh God, wish she were a better actress. Yes,
I like the movie that you describe, Julia. The one I watched. I kind of bored the daylights out of me, I have to say. I never developed an ounce of sympathy or interest in the characters whatsoever. I thought the setup was completely wrote by the book. I've seen it in a million movies, including Pixar movies. The tragic, instigating event, the family disrupted by death or mayhem. And then I agree that The Searchers kept crossing my mind. I haven't seen The Searchers probably in 20 years. As I watched that first portion of the movie, which is a Western style quest. Here are some of my really basic issues. First of all, I just have to say, I thought every plot and emotional beat was predictable, and I saw them a mile away, including one of the supposedly climactic and emotionally climactic ones at the end. They planted that seed. It's like, okay, so Chekhov puts a gun on the mantelpiece, but you don't have to sort of shove it in my eye, in act one of the play. I get it. There's a gun on the mantelpiece. But this, to me, it just, that people who will have seen it know what I'm saying. It just didn't work for me at all. The second thing is it really so old-fashioned to me that I can't, in the end, develop much of a... Of course, since I've been a tiny child, I've read allegories and parables and stories that feature anthropomorphized animals. So that in and of itself can't be the hurdle. But there's a double uncanniness here, which is the use of motion capture now is so sophisticated that you don't sense that this isn't a three-dimensional living creature. They've melded that human actor with the technology in order to produce what you believe is a speaking, talking, feeling ape. So there's no technical hurdle. But there's still something utterly uncanny about watching an ape with these, a monkey creature speaking in this human way. I can't cross the uncanny valley and really have much of an emotional investment in the ape clan and the ape story.
But you could in the Caesar movies.
More so, I wouldn't say that I admired those, but I didn't love them. I didn't really connect with them. What I would say is that in this movie, the insanely stilted speech patterns of the apes I find absolutely excruciating. But those are striped horses. This sort of halting, slow, kind of quasi-primitive speech pattern is grating, and it makes the movie 20 minutes longer than it would be otherwise. I couldn't get it beyond it. And then finally, as a parable about demagogic power, the problem is its own predecessors are so much more sophisticated, Dana, as you say, and original, as, by the way, is Dune, which the second one, which was just masterful, really draws out and tells the story of how demagogic power comes to be. And I thought this one was really crudely drawn in this. And the human actors, William Macy, who's typically tremendously good, and the young woman, Freya Allen, is I really hate to say it. I mean, she may be a wonderful actress in this movie. She's really inert to the point of putting you half to sleep. She's just so boring on camera. She hasn't created a character, frankly. And she didn't have a lot to work with, but still. So to me, this is just a unequivocal thumbs down.
Yeah, I agree that May's performance is inert to the point of perplexingness, and almost made me wonder if it was intentional
choice,
or that she's supposed to seem like a rabbit. She's supposed to seem like prey or like a non-person until she becomes a person.
Maybe they should have gotten a rabbit.
I don't think that's necessarily true, though, because there are humans in it. And I thought that scene was very powerful where they come across this sort of herd of primitive humans at a watering hole. And basically we see this mirror relationship where apes regard humans as we regard animals now, wild animals. And May is opposed to that. She's supposed to be, one of the smart ones. So I'm afraid that we have to pin it on the writing and the acting and not the intention.
Yeah, that clearly doesn't work. And I don't believe that this movie has anything that complicated to say. That's what I mean by it having sort of part one itis in the way that the new Avatar movie
Dune
did.
1 did too, by the way. I mean, a little bit.
Yeah, which, but we now see, okay, where the movie leaves us, we are set to explore the evolving relationship between what remains of humans and, apes as they come out of kind of a feudal era. And it looks like they're sort of headed towards a clash of civilization, a fight for civilization and a clash of civilization and a fight for what civilization might be this time. And I think in the first trilogy, it was the second movie that had the thorniest kind of philosophical wrestling. So I more meant that having read a bunch of bad reviews, I was expecting this to be a slog. And I actually found the kind of pace and character building, I don't know. I just was along for the ride. I was not bored. I did not connect with the May character very much. I agree with that critique, but I was sort of interested in the mechanics of this search and rescue plot and felt like it set up plausible material to make this second trilogy, I suppose, if they make one, as morally interesting as the first. I mean, just like what is at stakes, in the Marvel movies? All of that feels so fakerino, and the questions that underpin this set of franchises are just interesting, enduring ones, which doesn't mean that they'll necessarily do anything smart with them or that this one advances the ball very far down the court. But I'm just glad these movies exist. There's a much more interesting use of our blockbuster making technology and dollar than so many other things.
Yeah. All right, Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes is in movie theaters. Did I think about 60 million domestic over the weekend. You're probably going to see it. How do you feel Monday morning if you're Ryan Gosling, by the way? You kick off the summer blockbuster season. You tank at the box office. You coming out of Barbie, the Oscars, SNL. You're the biggest male movie star in the world. And you get crushed in week 2 at the box office by a motion capture ape, a chimp.
To quote the Simpsons Planet of the Apes parody, "You'll never make a monkey out of me." But they did.
They did.
Yes, you finally made a monkey out of me.
Tired of not being able to get a hold of anyone when you have questions about your credit card? With 24/7 US-based live customer service from Discover, everyone has the option to talk to a real person, anytime, day or night. Yes, you heard that right. You can talk to a human on the Discover customer service team anytime. So the next time you have a question about your credit card, call 1-800-DISCOVER to get the service you deserve. Limitations apply. See terms at discover.com/creditcard. Tired of not being able to get a hold of anyone when you have questions about your credit card? With 24/7 US-based live customer service from Discover, everyone has the option to talk to a real person, anytime, day or night. Yes, you heard that right. You can talk to a human on the Discover customer service team anytime. So the next time you have a question about your credit card, call 1-800-DISCOVER to get the service you deserve. Limitations apply. See terms at discover.com/creditcard.
Now is the moment in our podcast where we discuss business. Typically, Dana, what do we have this week?
Yes, Steve, our only business is to tell listeners about today's Slate Plus segment. We have a great one today. We're going to be talking with Carl Wilson, who's also coming in for a conversation about the great music producer and engineer Steve Albini. He's going to stick with us for a conversation about an Atlantic article about taste and the state of taste in the digital era. We'll get into it in the segment, but this piece essentially argues that the internet has made it sort of impossible to be an arbiter of taste or changed the meaning of what taste arbitrage is. It also talks a bit about the comparison between taste arbitrage and financial arbitrage in a way that is interesting, but perhaps debatable. We'll discuss that with the three of us and Carl Wilson, always somebody who's great on this particular subject, at the end of the show. If you're a Slate Plus member, you will hear that after our main 3 segments. If you're not a Slate Plus member, why don't you become one by signing up at slate.com/cultureplus. In exchange for your membership dollars, you get unlimited access to all the writing and podcasting on Slate. You'll never hear an ad on a podcast, and you'll never hit a paywall. I should also mention that you will be supporting our work and the work of our colleagues. So please, if you can, and if you haven't already, sign up today at slate.com/cultureplus. Okay, on with the show.
John Mulaney Presents Everybody's in L.A. is I got to use the past tense on this. It ran live. You can still see it, though. It's a funny little series on Netflix of 6 live broadcasts that coincided with Netflix's comedy event in L.A. So it was relatively easy to book top flight guests from the comedy world. You had Letterman, Seinfeld, Hannah Gadsby all came around to the Mulaney studio, sat on the studio. They were paired, curiously, with a non-celebrity who's an expert on earthquakes, coyotes, some distinctive aspect of L.A. life. The show was very, very L.A. And in fact, his best monologue, I thought, was that opening one about L.A. and the character of L.A. It was just one zinger after another landed really beautifully. It was funny. There are also some sketches in addition to the monologues. The whole thing added up to a ragged, raffish delight, ? It says in my script. We will discuss. We will determine it here. In the meantime, in the clip from the first episode, here we go. Mulaney has unfurled his map of L.A., is giving the audience a crash course on the city. I'm glad you get a chance. If you didn't see it to listen, this was a good monologue.
Fun fact. Did you know L.A. has a mayor? If you were rolling around town, you'd be like, no mayor, right? And then you'd be like, for no mayor, it's going okay. And that's not a knock at the current mayor, not at all. I think it is crazy in any decade for any person to look at all this and go, I got it. I'll be able to handle that. A little history. The first person to ever move to Los Angeles was a Spanish explorer in 1781 who thought he'd give it a shot here after friends told him he was the funniest guy at work. The city of Los Angeles was officially founded in 1842 as a place for improv students to go hiking. One of the stereotypes of LA is that it's all these, magical movies being made everywhere. Well, that's not Los Angeles. That is Vancouver up here. Everywhere. Well, that's not Los Angeles. That is Vancouver up here.
Oh, I'm laughing. Second time I've heard it, I'm laughing. Julia, very curious what you're an LA person. So give me a response from both angles. What'd you make of the show and what'd you make of it as a Angelino transplant?
I am both an LA person and a John Mulaney person. And I can't think of a cultural object I have loved more in so long. I enjoyed this so much, in part because I think it helped me understand what it would be like to love a late night talk show. Like throughout my life, there have been like the Letterman heads and the Conan heads and the people who feel that the sensibility of the convening comic who's putting on a raffish good time is so theirs that they bond deeply with it and feel deeply loyal to it. My husband is a Conan person, for example. I like Conan. I admire Conan. Conan's the best, but I've never been like, Conan, that's my guy. John Mulaney, every time I hear him talk, I'm like, John Mulaney, that's my guy. And so I loved this. And I also really connected to it as a transplanted Angelino because the particular specificity of the reverence for exploration of and celebration of Los Angeles as it is at this moment was very moving to me, like actually quite deeply moving. It's really rare. It's a common shtick in New York-based talk shows to go around and, razz the dudes on the street in Times Square. And I think just because out in LA, studios are studio-y and they are more necessarily kind of at a remove from the place. I'm just a lot less familiar. I mean, to be clear, I don't watch a lot of late night talk shows, so perhaps this is what Jimmy Kimmel does all the time, in which case apologies to Mr. Kimmel. But the kind of porousness of its exploration of the city in the finale, where there's a hunt to find Flea of the Red Hot Chili Peppers, was delightful. I watched that one live. I hadn't quite seen LA so precisely represented. I just adored it. But I'm like the worst possible judge because I'm so in the tank for both Mulaney and specific observations about LA.
No, I think that makes you among the best possible judges. But I want to get back to you on what you think it got right about LA. But first, I want to ask Dana, what do you make of this?
I mean, I'm glad it exists, but I think I can offer an astringent counterpoint without completely panning the show. I would not at all pan the show, but I would have some serious producer notes if this was going on beyond this pop-up 6-episode sort of pilot that it did. And it may be a pilot. You know, many critics have speculated that maybe John Mulaney wants to enter the late night space in some way, but he's trying to reinvent it. And if so, he has some interesting ideas. But if you want to hear my producer notes, okay, first of all, the episodes are too long and their lengths are too different from each other. I get very annoyed when I look at a list of episodes and it's like an hour and 15 minutes, an hour and 20 minutes. Like an hour and 20 minutes with no ads is a pretty deadly length for a talk show to be. And I think the parts of this show that are strong are very strong. The LA exploration and the general sort of love of the city is great. And I agree, unusual. You know, you don't often see, I mean, in movies you do sometimes. Michael Mann, for example, he would really vibe with this show, I think, right? This kind of sense of the openness and the, you know, open roads of LA and the weird things that you come across. And that it's sort of, that it's a wild space, you know, which I think this show was sort of interested in with talking about earthquakes and coyotes and palm trees and things like that. Yeah. The stand-up is great. I agree. Obviously, John Mulaney is kind of a master of that form, standing up, telling jokes and getting the audience to get into his own weird head. But I don't think he's a great interviewer at all. I don't like the part where they take calls from LA residents at all. I think he's mean to the callers and doesn't ask good questions, and that those are not successful segments. There's just a chaos and a sloppiness to this show, which I don't know. I mean, it's almost like generational. I feel like millennials love chaos more than I do as a trait in cultural products. You know, like especially with a TV show, I would like it to have some sort of format. I am a Conan person, and part of why is that I feel like you never know what you're going to get with Conan because his mind goes all over the place, but you do know what his segments are and sort of what order they come in and what shape his show would have, right? And this show seemed really shapeless to me, both because of that length feature that I cited, but also just like sometimes he's interviewing one person on the couch and it's great. He interviews John Carpenter, the director. It's really, really good. And it's just the two of them together. Yeah. John Carpenter's so adorable. He's throwing devil horns at the audience. He's just such a character. But then at other times he's got like Hannah Gadsby and Jon Stewart and an expert on palm trees and some other guy. Like there's like 5 people on the couch. And you sort of don't know who's being interviewed, and people are trying to tell jokes while the camera's not on them. And this is all part of doing live television, and I'm sure some people really embrace that chaos. But I felt in some of those segments like, this is really shapeless, and it's going on, and I don't know what this is about. There was also one sketch that was about like 2 guys who used to belong to the Manson family taking a tour of LA that I thought was terrible. It was not funny. It was tasteless, and I could not wait for it to end, and it kept returning and returning. Anyway, shapeless chaos with some really funny moments.
I think it's interesting to think about what makes a good stand-up comedian or a great stand-up comedian. In the case of Mulaney, he's extraordinary, right? Top of his game, and a good late-night host. They're not. I don't think they're the same qualities exactly. I mean,
no, not at all.
Yeah, really. And there's obviously some overlap. I mean, Leno is a comedian, stand-up, and was devoted to the art of it. I mean, he did it long beyond when he needed a penny. But by and large, they're not the. I mean, David Letterman, famously a Midwestern cut-up weatherman, you know. Carson, as far as I know, was never a stand-up. Conan was, as you say, a comedy writer, behind the camera, a Simpsons writer. There's some quality to being a top-flight stand-up comedian whose essence is like you either die or kill up there. That high wire act, all alone in front of an audience with a mic, you know, and the kind of warmth and companionability of a person you're going to hang out with night after night after night for an hour. It's no wonder Netflix wants to get into this. It is or Mulaney for that matter, if he does, it's a phenomenally lucrative profit driver for whoever gets the formula right. Could they get it right with Mulaney? That would be interesting. I agree with all of your assessments. There's something way more angular and intense about him and his style that takes away from that companionability. The throwing all the people on the couch reminded me of that second half hour of Carson, when after all the pre-prepared and tighter elements of the show were out of the way. You often had like, a zoo guy with a live animal or a boa on the couch alongside, Sammy Davis Jr. and, fill in the blank, a Charo. And, there was kind of a hijinksy thing. The whole show is like that with this. I thought the first episode was quite good. I thought the Finding Flea on the final episode was really fun. He was so game. He
says
lovable.
About L.A. at the end is so moving.
It's
his little speech about L.A. and how much he loves it.
Tremendously good. And I thought a lot of it really fell flat. But what I will say is this, is that to an absolutely dyed-in-the-wool, born and raised East Coaster, New York City kid, I love the idea that the beauty of the city is your inability to understand or comprehend something so sprawling geographically, so diverse ethnically and in other ways, so strange. It's both utterly gritty and real and a simulacrum because of, the showbiz industry dominating it. The weirdness of the perfect weather, it's status as paradise offset by, and the show's very smart about this, a kind of terrestrial menace. The earth seems to be saying, it's too beautiful for you creatures here. We're going to now wipe you out.
Yeah. I mean, for all that New York has its reputation as like, a tough elbow throwing city of fast talking guys, New York is an incredibly welcoming place. You can show up there and rent an apartment for 3 weeks and claim it as your own city. The whole point of New York is that people move there, and if they can make it there, they can make it anywhere. And there's glory in the hustle, whether you make it or not. And it's like so easy to become a New Yorker. And so few people there did grow up there that it's actually kind of hard to feel like an outsider in New York. Whereas LA is, I did see one response from a longtime Angelino that was like, I can't handle the Midwestern transplant energy of this Mulaney show. And I was like, God damn it. I thought that this show feels very LA to me as a Northeastern transplant, but there's always sort of somebody kind of gatekeeping LA and its unknowability. But as someone who generally responds well to the tightly plotted, tightly edited, and just generally tight, maybe LA is increasing my tolerance for loose chaos. But what I loved about the way in which the interviews were de-emphasized in the conversation is the talk show interviews are fucking stupid. Like, who cares if he's interviewing them well? They're all canned anecdotes. They're completely fucking dumb. They're designed to be snipped and snapped. Like, nothing surprising or interesting or real in any way can happen in a one-on-one talk show interview, or it's very hard. And so the sort of like, let's all hang on the couch and see what happens, God, I don't know. It just felt really fresh and exciting to me. I mean, there were moments of kind of nerviness. Hannah Gadsby is kind of a jerk to the mayor of LA in ways that made me uncomfortable. And I hear you that John Mulaney can be kind of aggressive with the call-in callers, but there is like a pervasive underlying spirit of generous warmth in the whole endeavor that even made those kind of slightly brutal cutoffs when the story was dragging on not actually feel cruel to me. Maybe that's just because I'm so in the tank for John Mulaney. But I think the other thing is, one of my very favorite Mulaney sets is to me, his great gift as a comedian, and part of why I love him so much is that he's a close reader. I mean, he's essentially like a critic as a comedian. He's such a good reader of cultural texts, right? From his famous bit about why the interviewees in the Law and Order shows are constantly won't stop moving their boxes around. Like, that is a great observation, right? About the text of Law and Order. Similarly, his bit about the hierarchy of assholes as defined by New York Post headlines, which ranges from like bozo to angel to saint, is brilliant. And so seeing him apply that close reading to the particulars of Los Angeles was really exciting and delightful to me. But there's just I don't know if it's the post-rehab Mulaney or just his general vibe, but there's kind of a generous warmth in the convening that I was really moved by. And I don't hope that this becomes daily. I think that would be too much. The notion of it as a annual pop-up around this Netflix as a joke festival makes a lot of sense. And I know some people were mentioning him as a potential Oscars host. I feel like Jimmy Kimmel's kind of got that locked and is doing a great job at that. But I'm happy to see John Mulaney healthy and doing lovely, interesting things.
All right. Well, all 6 of them are there on Netflix, archived and ready to watch, not live. They're fun. They're weird. If you check them out, let us know what you thought of them. Okay, let's move on.
Hey, it's Kaylee Cuoco for Priceline. Ready to go to your happy place for a happy price? Well, why didn't you say so? Just download the Priceline app right now and save up to 60% on hotels. So whether it's Cousin Kevin's Kazoo Concert in Kansas City, go Kevin, or Becky's Bachelorette Bash in Bermuda, you never have to miss a trip ever again. So download the Priceline app today. Your savings are waiting.
Go to your happy place for a happy price. Go to your happy price, Priceline.
Having choices is good, and checking accounts are no exception. At Sandy Spring Bank, we have a variety of checking options and make it easy to choose based on your needs. Mobile deposits and payments, interest checking, or checking with no fees or minimums. Best of all, we'll help you select the account that suits your life. What's your next financial destination? Sandy Spring Bank. Visit sandyspringbank.com/checking. Member FDIC.
Steve Albini died last week of a heart attack at the age of 61. He founded Electrical Audio, a Chicago recording studio that helped make albums by Nirvana, The Breeders, Pixies, PJ Harvey. Some truly extraordinary records came out of that studio. Albini himself had started out as a musician, a guitarist in the punk bands Big Black and later Shellac. And he hated the word producer. I mean, he learned how to record records by making them himself. He loved analog. He did not like to overcomplicate or overthink the process, and much less glamorize it. He preferred to think of himself, if I'm correct, as an engineer, was as unobsessed with money and credit as you could possibly be. If you wanted to work with him, basically, he said yes. You just had to ring him up, and he had to determine you were serious about making the record, as serious as he was. We're joined now by Carl Wilson, a Slate's music critic and good friend of this program. Carl, thanks for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me.
Albini, I think it's fair to say, had both an ethic and a sound. I mean, it was sort of more an approach to recording loud, tough punk or punk-adjacent bands. But discuss maybe each of these and how they went together. There was a punk ethic and a punk sound that went into making Albini this distinctive figure in the music world.
Yeah, there are sort of a couple of different parts to this, but as a producer, as a recording engineer, which is what he preferred to be called, his approach was very based on capturing the live sound of an artist in the studio, and the very workaday approach to that he had mostly involved being incredibly specific about things like which microphones you were using and where they were placed. And, people describe when he went to other people's studios to record, he would spend the day measuring the room, taking apart the equipment that was already there and reassembling it to his own specifications, and then figuring out the exact tangents, basically, that all of the sound would be traveling on and placing microphones for there. And then he would try to do things very quickly. He didn't like to linger around. He said if an album couldn't be recorded in 2 weeks, it wasn't worth making. He discouraged people from doing multiple takes. He discouraged people from overly ornamenting the music. But he would also do all of those things if that's what the band wanted. He really saw himself, he often described his approach as being a documentarian of what the band was doing. And that kind of combined with his ethical point of view, he considered himself there to serve the band as a technical expert, and really disparaged producers who presented themselves as kind of Svengalis or philosophers of what the music ought to be like, and thought that was kind of a con man job. And he refused to take royalties on the albums that he recorded. There's in the past couple of weeks, the letter that he wrote to Nirvana when they were kind of negotiating about working together is circled around, and he, expressed complete discomfort with the idea of taking a percentage, which is the standard industry thing for a producer to do, on this album that was obviously going to sell millions of copies, In Utero, which was the follow-up to Nevermind. And so, the follow-up to basically one of the biggest breakthrough albums ever, and asked for a flat fee of, I think, $100,000, as opposed to the millions of dollars he would have made over the years that way. And it was because he regarded himself as a translator and technician, and the band is the true authors and the only people who should really be considered. But all of that philosophy came out of a punk rock ethic of the idea that the process in itself had an ethical dimension, and everything from how you recorded to how you distributed and sold music was a political question for him, and remained that throughout his life. And he continued to have that approach even after In Utero made him one of the most famous producers in the world for a while. Sound-wise, it's an interesting thing because, yes, he came very much out of punk rock, and his personal tastes very much lean towards noisy, abrasive sound, again, partly as a political choice and partly as just the aesthetic he liked. But he did not stick to that as an engineer. He recorded all kinds of artists. He made country albums, he made folk albums, he made subtle, beautiful, quiet things like Nina Nastasia, or one of my favorite examples is the band Cordelia's Dad, who were a Boston area kind of punk rooted, but totally old time folk and traditional, Celtic and rural music band that did a lot of a cappella singing, and he made some of their best recordings. So it wasn't that he was an aesthetic purist on that level. He certainly recognized the value of a diversity of musics, but he also let those opinions be known in his aesthetic and what his aesthetic was outside of the studio. And that's an important part of his legacy too, that we can talk about.
Carl, because we haven't dropped in any music yet to show what Steve Albini's style was like as an engineer, as he liked to be called, I wanted to see if we could listen to two different versions of the end of Nirvana's All Apologies, which was from In Utero, the album that he produced, but was not a song originally that his mix made it onto the album. So in reading about Albini, I saw someone comment that the 2013 deluxe version of In Utero contained his mix. So you could hear the difference between the way it came out on the album and the way he wanted it to come out. And the differences are small for someone who's not a huge audiophile like me, but at the end, I really noticed something that seemed to comment on what Steve Albini's aesthetic was. It's about the last 15 seconds of the song. And if you remember the song, it's the part where Cobain fades out, repeating the line, "All alone is all we are." If we could just hear first the original version that made it onto the album. And then we'll listen to Albini's remix. So you really have to listen to those closely to see the difference, but this extra raggedness and unfinishedness to the end, right? So that the all alone is all we are becomes even more kind of thematically punched out. And that to me spoke to his kind of craftsmanship. I wanted to hear what Carl thought.
Generally, the aim within Utero was, from Kurt Cobain's point of view, to kind of refute and counterbalance the big appealing sound that they'd had on Nevermind. And he specifically sought out Albini, specifically because of Albini's work with the Pixies in the late 80s. And Cobain was a huge Pixies fan and wanted to kind of get the sound that he loved on Surfer Rosa on this album. And so that was controversial with the record company from the beginning. And then when they turned the record in that they'd recorded with Albini, the record company at first refused to put it out, and the remixing of All Apologies and I think of Heart Shaped Box, two of the sort of most single ready tracks on the album, was the compromise that they made in order to get the record put out. And then they also came around to thinking that perhaps some of the starkness of Albini's mixes didn't serve all of the material properly, and Albini refuted them on that, and as he was in the habit of doing, publicly said that they'd sold out the record and that he wanted to distance himself from it. So, there's those small touches there. You can see that the difference isn't that vast, but he could invest a huge amount of significance in those things. And definitely when you listen to it, there is an aesthetic difference.
Can we talk a little bit about how his aversion to selling out has aged? I think this is probably one of the first legendary musical deaths, because he died so young at age 61, that is one of those people whose work created the sonic wallpaper of my specific youth. Like going through this massive Steve Albini playlist this weekend that Matthew Perpetua put together, I was just like, oh, right, this is what my adolescence sounded like. This is so fundamental to what music was and what music I revered as a kid. And I found the culture of music fandom very alienating and very male and very confusing and very indecipherable as a teen, but also really loved many of these songs. And it seems like Albini himself kind of mellowed with age and got a little bit less rigid in his sense that all choices about how to make music and with whom to make music are political. I think the fact that he's a legendary Chicago producer who was extremely sneering and dismissive of the work of my favorite Chicago artist of that time, Liz Phair, possibly weights my evaluation of his kind of purist machismo. But yeah, I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about that, Carl, sort of the way in which his righteousness and his raucousness mellowed as he aged.
Yeah, first of all, I just want to join you in saying that this death, Albini was 61. I'm a little older than you, but quite a bit younger than him, feels monumental in terms of the culture of that time period. To me, he was a really defining cultural figure, as much for the sort of acerbic interventions that he made culturally as for the specific music that he put out. But he was a complicated figure on that level because there were people in zine culture and in punk culture in those times who were definitely just interested in being offensive for the sake of being offensive and in shock value. And Albini had some of that attitude, but it was usually in the service of an idea in his case. But, the mentioning Liz Phair is very germane. There's a famous letter that he wrote to the Chicago Reader, I think at the end of 1992, about their year-end roundup, and the headline that the reader put on his letter, which was reflective of the language that he used, was three pandering sluts and their journalist stooge. And that was in reference to Urge Overkill, Smashing Pumpkins, and Liz Phair. So yeah, he could be this kind of scathing and really verging on outrageous critic. And we should say too that this also applied to his own music. And most infamously, he had a band for a brief while that was named after a Japanese manga character, and that character was called Rape Man. And people picketed shows because of the name of that band. And he held his ground for a little while, although moved away from it. And there are lots of songs that use offensive language in their titles or lyrics, all of which, again, was kind of done from the point of view of satire and in many ways to attack that bigotry itself, but not in ways that would translate if you weren't coming from both the cultural milieu, and also from, he later acknowledged, the position of privilege to throw that language around without finding it threatening or feeling the impacts of that. And I think one of the things that makes him a really heartening generational figure is that over time he came to repent those things and said, I won't only say that the culture was different, I'll say that I was wrong to do those things at the time. And it was a style of culture and on the left and in the underground at the time to do these satirical things with the deliberate attempt to sort of expose hypocrisy, but doing it by taking on the character of the enemy in these ways that was not recognized as how alienating and unwelcoming it could seem to the very people in whose solidarity it was supposed to be being done.
Yeah, beautifully said. Carl, we cannot talk about Steve Albini without mentioning the essay he wrote for the Baffler in '93, The Problem with Music, in which he takes us through every step of the way in which a young band gets seduced by an A&R representative and signs a contract that seems, as if they've made it, $250,000, signing advance, and he just takes you through every step of how you get screwed. And it ends with him saying, the record company has walked away with $3 million, and each band member's walked away with whatever it is, like $2,500 each at the end of the day, net through the whole process. And that piece to me was just absolutely seminal. It put in perspective how artists in the music business get almost universally screwed.
So yeah, that piece in the Baffler was really monumental. You have to remember that this was a time when, because of the breakthrough of Nirvana and the sort of breakout of alternative music, so-called, all kinds of people were being courted by major labels at the time. Like, there was a kind of a feeding frenzy on the rock underground at the time. So this was information that a lot of people needed at that time. And I don't think it had ever been explained to people what it meant that basically all of the money that record companies spend is eventually going to be reclaimed from any money that the band makes. And lots of people lost their shirts or ended up in deals that prevented them from being able to freely make music while record companies weren't even putting out their records in that time period. All kinds of things happened. And the end of the last line of that article was, "Some of your friends are already this fucked." And it was really a primer for people about what kind of danger they could get in. Now, Albini didn't believe that anybody should do this, but the truth is that there are ways to profitably have a relationship with a major label. And, it was part of a sign of the ways that he could be rigid, that he laid it out as only possibly a scam, only a trench of shit, as he put it, that you'll find yourself wading through from one end to the other. But it was incredibly helpful, and I think educated a whole generation of musicians and people in music circles about how some basic stuff of the business worked. It's a real representation of the ways in which there was an effort among people during that period of time to come up with a way of approaching music culture that wasn't about celebrity and wasn't about rich and famous, but was about finding a way to make a sustainable living and sustain communities. And all of the things that are so prickly about Albini's approach to the business in that way really do, I think, they're some of the last standing monuments to an idea that now, with the sort of post-internet culture in which musicians really have to find some other way to make money now that records don't sell, this idea of selling out has withered and died away in ways that I think are really lose something valuable about independent culture. But as he would acknowledge again, it's a privileged position to start with. The idea that you're coming to music primarily as a means of personal expression and in no way as a hustle and a way to, just find a way to get by in the world really speaks to what that community of people were coming from.
All right. Well, Carl, thank you so much for coming on to discuss Steve Albini. Before you go, do you have one most cherished Albini record or impossible?
I mean, it is very difficult to say. I would say one of my favorite recordings he ever did was by the band Sonzo Haya, the singer-songwriter Jason Molina, who died tragically young. His album, Magnolia Electric Company, the song Just Be Simple. If we could go out on that, one of my favorite recordings ever.
You'll never hear me talk about one day getting out. Why put a new address on the same old loneliness? Everybody knows.
Brilliant. All right. Thanks, Carl. Thanks for coming on. What a pleasure.
Thank you.
And when he's not home, someone else will know always is.
I want to tell you about a new show from the Financial Times called Life and Art from FT Weekend, hosted by me, Lila Raptopoulos. Life and Art is twice a week. On Mondays, I have a guest on to talk about life and how to live a good one. Everything from winter travel to cooking to living more creatively. And on Fridays, we talk art. Two FT journalists and I discuss a piece of culture that's in the air, new music, movies, and more. Find Life and Art from FT Weekend wherever you listen.
All right, now is the moment in our podcast when we endorse Dana. What do you got this week?
All right, I have something to read this week. So I guess it was a couple of months ago now, we talked on the show about Judith Butler's new book, Who's Afraid of Gender, sort of framed by my review of it on Slate, but just sort of talking about her as a figure in general. This is now a couple weeks old, but on April 29th in The New Yorker, their wonderful, wonderful book critic, Parul Sehgal, whose work we've talked about before on the show, wrote a great profile of Judith Butler. And I will preface this by saying, with all love to The New Yorker, I don't always love their profiles of celebrities or, big figures. There's a certain kind of New Yorker profile style that can flatten that person out and that has this isn't universal, but there's in its sort of worst archetype, the New Yorker profile can flatten the subject and also have this kind of arch distance from them, where they're sort of always looking for a moment that makes the person look slightly ridiculous or something like that. This profile is nothing like that. It's completely written in Parul Sehgal's voice. It completely gets across the presence of Judith Butler, who, as I think I mentioned in the segment, from my experience studying with them at Berkeley, is very funny. And that's really captured in this profile, as are a lot of things that I didn't know about Judith Butler because they were a very private and somewhat famous person. So, getting to sort of visit their office and see what books are in the backseat of their car, those kind of moments were really fun to read. There are also some things that are, not funny, but are quite serious and sometimes somewhat upsetting in this essay about their life story. But it's a wonderful profile. So whether or not, you're going to read that book or dig further into Judith Butler, if you just want to know a little bit about what it's like to hang out with them, read Who's Afraid of Judith Butler in The New Yorker by Parul Sehgal.
Oh, that's awesome. Thanks, Dana, for flagging it. Julia, what do you got?
We're going to speak in our Plus segment today about cultural arbitrage and where you learn things and where you don't learn things. And I just want to shout out the song that will no doubt be one of the songs of the summer, Espresso.
Now he's thinking about me every night. Oh, is it that sweet? I guess so. So you can't sleep, baby.
By Sabrina Carpenter, a new pop girly on the scene, famously dating Barry Keoghan, for those of you following fashion's most outre couple. But this song is like stealthy and slinky, and you listen to it once and you're like, I don't know what everybody's talking about. This is only okay. And then you cannot stop playing it in a row.
And are on vacation. And I got this one boy, and he won't stop calling.
I heard about it on Las Culturistas and Who Weekly, two shows where the hosts keep abreast of the kind of pop I like faster than I do. And the way that they were talking about it made me click it up and check it out and first think, and then think more. So if I can play that role for you, dear listener, and you haven't checked out Espresso yet, it's time.
I love it. Okay, so I fell head over heels. I arbitraged the shit out of this. I was like an 80s bond trader with the New Zealand band, the Beths. I swear to God.
You got me into them. I love them.
Yes, they're just so good. And it was early enough that when I endorsed them on this show, I think I heard almost immediately from their manager. You know, it was they couldn't quite get a cup of coffee in the United States yet, but they were inevitable, believe me, and I'm sure I played no role in their ascent. What played a role in it was their unbelievable talent, the catchiness of their music, the insane verve with which they carry it over. So credit where credit is due. But the funny thing is, well, I've only just discovered years later that I really like as much another New Zealand band who I didn't know is from New Zealand. And I don't know exactly how to like then overlap them and figure out what the New Zealandness of the New Zealand essence is of both of these bands that makes me love them so much. But there's some, even though they are superficially quite different, there's some commonality there, I think. They're called Yumi Zuma, and like the Beths, I mean, people are laughing their asses off listening to this. I mean, Yumi Zuma is a big band. They've been around for a while now. They've broken, you know, in the indie scale of things, pretty huge. But I just didn't, I suddenly, a song of theirs came on a mammoth playlist of mine made up of everything. And I was like, oh, wait, who is this? And it was them. And I went through all of my playlists, aggregated the songs of theirs that I love. And I realized there's something just delightful. So I don't know, like fetching, what's the word? Like catchy, exuberant, with just that tincture of melancholy and more that makes it beautiful and not just sort of frivolous. And it's poppier than the Beths, I think, in some ways. It doesn't have that punk edge that the Beths retain, even though they make melodic music. Anyway, I love Yumi Zuma. We're going to link to my playlist of just randomly, it's like 12 or 14 of their songs I really love. Check them out. Yumi Zuma. Julia, thank you so much.
Thanks, Steve.
Dana, thanks a lot.
It's a pleasure.
Yeah, total pleasure. You'll find links to some of the things we talked about today on our show page. That's slate.com/culturefest, and you can email us at culturefest@slate.com. Our introductory music is by the composer Nicholas Bertel. Our production assistant is Kat Hong. Our producer is Jared Downing. For Dana Stevens and Julia Turner, and of course Carl Wilson, I'm Stephen Metcalf. Thank you so much for joining us. We will see you soon.
We all have that friend who wakes up early to go get everyone McDonald's breakfast, while the rest of us sleep in. This is your sign to thank them. And if you're that friend, this is us saying thank you.
Just a friendly reminder that right now, get any size iced coffee before 11 a.m. for just 99 cents. And a satisfying sausage McMuffin with egg is just $2.79. Price and participation may vary. Cannot be combined with any other offer or combo meal.
Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.